So welcome everybody. My name is Phil LaMarche. I'm a professor here at SUNY Canton. I'm also the director of this little writing series, reader series called the Living Writers Series at SUNY Canton. It's great to have you all here. I appreciate you coming out tonight. I also have a few other folks I need to thank that help make this literary series possible. The SUNY Canton Office of the Provost and the President, I'd like to thank. They've always been big supporters of this, as well as the SUNY Canton College Foundation has also always been a generous supporter from this series from the beginning. The College of Business and Liberal Arts, the English Department, our Public Relations and Communications Department has always been a wonderful supporter of this group, and I appreciate everyone who has chipped in to help make this possible. I'd like to thank all of you guys for coming out tonight. I look forward to the time when we can all do this in person in Kingston Theater, but for the moment we're online, and in some ways we get to reach out to many of you, our online students who are not here on campus, and that is a benefit as well. So we'll look on the positive side of things. Tonight we have our author, Melissa Febos, who is the author of the critically acclaimed memoir, Whip Smart, and the essay collection, Abandon Me, which was a LAMBDA Literary Award finalist, a Publishing Triangle Award finalist, an Indie Next Pick, and was widely named a best book of 2017. Her second essay collection, Girlhood, a national bestseller, was published by Bloomsbury in March of this year, and a craft book, Body Work, will be published by Catapult in March. The inaugural winner of the Jeanne Córdova Nonfiction Award from LAMBDA Literary, her work has appeared in all of the best publications, including the Paris Review, the New York Times Magazine, The Guardian, Elle, and Vogue. She's won awards and fellowships from all the most prestigious institutions and foundations. And like I said, she's published her work in just anywhere that's anywhere. Her career has really taken off. She's received an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College. She is an associate professor at the University of Iowa, where she teaches in the nonfiction writing program. Years ago, a mutual friend of ours said, you have to teach this book, Whip Smart, and you have to bring this author, Melissa Febos, to campus. And at that time, I agreed to it. It sounded thrilling. And I had the wonderful and very interesting experience of leading my undergraduate class through her memoir, Whip Smart, which I still have students who reach out to me. This was in 2017, so this was years ago. Students who have graduated who reach out and want to talk about that experience of reading that book together, of meeting Melissa, and going through that experience. It was really powerful. I have been a big fan of her work since then. I've followed her astronomical rise since that book. It's been such a wonderful career for her. And I've found her latest memoir, Girlhood, to be deeply moving and incredibly thought-provoking. It's a blend of theory and personal experience that is seamless, and it intricately unpacks the difficult moments of adolescence and early adulthood with a level of thoughtfulness and care that is striking. In her portrait of her own girlhood, we see reflections of our own youth and all of its awe, its difficulty, its trauma. Her work takes us to places that we've never been before, yet somehow we've always known. I can't recommend her work enough, and I'm really excited to have her here tonight. Please help me welcome Melissa Febos.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a really nice introduction, full of hyperbole, as a good introduction should be. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I find that at this point, since we've been doing stuff on Zoom now for a couple of years, it feels like there's a certain amount of fatigue that people are feeling. So I feel especially grateful when people decide to sign in and listen, because I know we're all staring at the computer screens a lot longer than is comfortable for us. So I really appreciate your attention. And I have such good memories of coming and reading in person, visiting the North Country. And I hope I get to come back again someday in person, but for now, I'm glad that we're all here today. So I'm going to read, I think, from a couple of essays in Girlhood, my latest, and I think I'm going to read, let's see. I'm going to start with an excerpt from an essay called Wild America, and I'm going to try to show you here. The book is illustrated by a friend of mine who is an amazing artist and also a great fiction writer named Forsyth Harmon, and she did these beautiful illustrations for the book. And this is one of my favorites. It's a little hyena and it has this really elaborate border and it says, "I was an animal." And yeah, I'm a big fan of them. It was really fun to collaborate with a visual artist. And I actually have a print of this one hanging in our living room. So I'm going to skip around a little bit here, but it's basically, you know, about how weird I was when I was a kid. I'm just going to set my stopwatch so that I'm not that guy who reads forever. Here we go. Wild America. Eloise Brill and I sat on the beach at Goodwill Pond while nearby our fellow campers ate cellophane-wrapped sandwiches on rotting picnic tables. It was the summer of 1989, and our parents had enrolled us in afternoon swim camp at the public pond. Rumor among the elementary school set was that the water in Goodwill Pond was warm and yellow because of not sunshine and pollen, but rather a high concentration of peat. It seemed plausible, given that we all definitely peed in the water, but I didn't care. I had just won the afternoon's timed race and was buoyant with my victory. "Are you a lesbian?" Eloise asked me, smug as only a 9-year-old with a new word can be. "I don't know," I said. "What's a lesbian?" "Give me your hand," she said. And when I did, she pressed hers against mine, the grit of sand between our sticky palms. Someone's happy scream bounced across the water, followed by a splash. Eloise squinted at the tops of our fingers. "See," she said, "your ring finger is longer than your pointer finger. That means you're a lesbian." I drew back my hand to examine it. She was right. What else might my body reveal about me that even I didn't know? The thought crept through me like a shadow. I shrugged. "Let's go eat lunch," I said, and brushed off my hand on my swimsuit, as if I could leave the worry there in the cool sand. Before I learned about beauty, I delighted in my body. I was a passionate child with calloused feet and lots of words. I talked fast and moved faster, through the woods around our Cape Cod home, up trees and into the ocean's crashing surf. Finely tuned to the swells of my own and others' hearts, I sensed a deep well at my center, a kind of umbilical cord that linked me to a roiling infinity of knowledge and pathos that underlay the trivia of our daily lives. Its channel was not always open, and what opened it was not always predictable, often songs and poems, a shaft of late afternoon light, an unexpected pool of memory, the coo of doves at dusk, whose knell ached my own throat and seemed the cry of loneliness itself. It was often possible to open the channel by will, an option that I found both terrifying and irresistible. I would read or think or feel myself into a brimming state, not joy or sorrow, but some apex of their intersection, the raw matter from which each was made, then lie with my back to the ground, body vibrating, heart thudding, mind foaming, thrilled and afraid I might combust. I might die of feeling too much. Okay, I just want to preface this next little part I'm going to read from this essay by saying that I had, and this is one of the wondrous parts of writing memoir, is that once you start sort of burrowing into your own memories, you unearth things that you haven't touched since they happened. And this is one memory like that. I had no memory of doing this until I started writing this essay and I found it. So here you go. My mother had raised me vegetarian, and though I harbored no real desire to eat meat, sometimes in summer, I would take a hunk of watermelon to a remote corner of our yard and pretend that it was a fresh carcass. On all fours, I would bury my face in the sweet red fruit meat and tear away mouthfuls. Sometimes I'd rip handfuls out and cram them between my teeth, which wasn't much like any kind of animal I knew of. It was less playing a particular kind of animal than enacting a form of wildness that I recognized in myself, but had no appropriate expression in human culture. I watched Wild America along with the more savage nature specials on public television and thought, maybe no one else recognized themselves in the hyena's blood-soaked grin, her ruthless hunger. Maybe no one else's heart raced, fists clenched, neck tensed, unable to tell if she was more impala or lion. Well, I did. Alone in the woods behind our house, I had beaten my chest, acted out my own invented stories without a thought to how another's gaze might see me. I sympathized with the jittery business of squirrels and fanatical obsessions of our golden retriever. I was confounded by silverware, why it should exist when we had such perfect instruments at the ends of our arms. I will just say, last thing I'll say about that is that my wife has a really hilarious impression of me as a child pretending to eat watermelon like a wild animal, which you'll never get to see, but maybe you can imagine it. Walt Whitman claimed our distinction from animals to be that they do not sweat and whine about their condition, and not one is dissatisfied, not one is demented with the mania of owning things. I learned in elementary school that we were animals, but unlike other animals, we did not seem driven by the instinct for physical survival. We were so far up the food chain that it was no longer even visible to us. We were beyond survival in a dark and lofty realm wherein our obsolete instincts had been perverted into atrocities like capitalism and bikini waxing. I might not have been able to name this, but I recognized it. In elementary school, however, we kids were not making an ontological study of late 20th century middle-class American life. We were neither learning about capitalism nor reading Whitman. We were learning how to be human. We were learning the exact way in which, though we were animals, we should not look or act like them. To call someone an animal was an insult. As my peers and I approached puberty, this was unfortunate because I had trouble keeping track of the narrative. I was covered in scabs and bruises. I was sun-browned, full of sighs, and interested in every orifice. I was an animal. By middle school, this felt like an especially disgusting secret because I was also a girl. Sometimes I think about going back. I imagine reversing the film of my personhood, reeling the spool to find the single frame where it all changes, as though there would be one murky celluloid square in which my body was taken away from me. Not just my body, but all the pleasures that came through it, a hand reaching into the frame and snatching it all away, the sting of salt water on my skinned knees, the ache of a palm tendered by oak bark, the pelt of gravel against my calves as my bike flew downhill, the hum of my legs after running all day, my own voice ringing in that cathedral of pine trees, the perfect freedom of caring only what my body could do and never how it was seen. There wouldn't just be one frame, of course. It was so many things. The skinny girls flashed all over movie screens, the television set my mother tried to keep out of our house, the slippery issues of teen magazine that started arriving without a subscription in our mailbox, true story, that classmate at her pool party silently commenting on my precociously developed figure, the rich girl who pinched my thigh and pointed out how much thicker it was than her own. So there's a bunch of stuff about my body dysmorphia and shame, and I'm going to skip over all of that to the redemption, because that's what you can do in a reading. You can't do it in your book, but I'm going to skip to the end. And I'm just going to read a really heartwarming part about me, like in my late 30s or in my mid 30s. 6 months into our relationship, Danica and I spent a long sunny Saturday wandering around Toronto holding hands. Will you tell me something you like about me? I asked as the sun heavied with afternoon, made everything slow and golden. Of course, she said. What kind of thing? I said, a shallow thing? It was the sort of exchange that had already become a convention of our relationship. In the very beginning, we had agreed to ask for exactly what we wanted from each other and had both kept that promise. How simple it was and how long it had taken. It had required all of my previous relationships, a decade of therapy, and nearly a year of celibacy to learn how to identify what I needed, how to ask for it, and finally how to receive it. In this and so many other ways, our love felt like the culmination of so many years' work. Something that I like about you, she smiled, is that you're not very tall. I laughed. Moments before, I had commented on how comfortable I was in the sneakers I'd worn for our day of walking. It was rare for me to wear sneakers for anything but jogging. I had worn heels of some kind almost every day since my late teens. But if I were taller, I could wear shoes like that, I said, stopping at a boutique window to point at a sleek pair of Oxfords. Why can't you wear them now? She said, genuinely baffled. I grimaced. My legs are so short and my hands and feet are so big, I would look like a little troll, I explained. I've never been this honest with a lover about my preoccupation with disguising my true form, my belief that it needed a disguise. Like my past lovers, Danica is taller than me and dresses mostly in clothes designed for men. The similarities end there. I don't mean that her hands are bigger than mine, though they are. I mean that the roles we assume in our relationship don't fall into gendered categories in or out of the bedroom. It's part of what makes it possible for me to share with her these inhibitions. I am certain that she doesn't need me to play the girl. We both just get to be ourselves. Do you know what else has a small body and big hands and feet? She said. I shook my head. A baby tiger, she said. They're very strong and nimble. They're excellent swimmers and climbers in addition to being extremely cute. As I laughed, she turned her body to face mine. And when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Little friend, she said, I am charmed by your proportions. Just because you have an issue with them doesn't mean that anyone else does. She looked back at the window. I think you look great in those shoes. Part of learning to receive things is learning to do so when you haven't even asked for them. To let love sneak up on you with its warm splash of light and just stand there squinting. It can be a lot to take. I stood there for a minute, not sure if I was going to cry, but I didn't, and we kept walking. And I'll stop that essay there. Okay, so I think I'm just going to read. Check my timer. I'm just going to read from another essay. This one is called Thesmophoria, which I'll explain what that is. And I'm going to show you the picture too. And this has some honeycomb around the edges. And it's a drawing of this, this famous statue of Persephone that I talk about in the essay, although I'm not going to read that. And the quote in that drawing is, "My darkness has become my work on this earth." And, you know, this was one where I did some research and I was writing this essay about me and my mom, and the Demeter and Persephone myth started creeping into it. And I was like, oh God, could anyone write about a mother-daughter relationship and then use this myth and have it be anything but totally predictable? And I remember actually saying to my wife, like, is it possible for me to do this? And she said, only if you find a way to do something surprising with it or surprise yourself with it. And so I ended up being able to do that, at least for myself. And again, I'm going to skip around a little bit in here. So yeah, we'll see. My birthday falls during Pinepsion, the 4th month of the ancient Greek calendar. It is the month of Persephone's abduction, the month Demeter's despair laid all the earth to waste, and during which the women of Athens celebrated Thesmophoria, a fertility festival that lasted 3 days, each with its own title, Cathodos, Mystia, and Kalagenia. The rites of the Thesmophoria were kept a secret from men and included the burying of sacrifices and the retrieval of the previous year's oblations, often the bodies of slain pigs whose remains were offered on altars to the goddesses and then scattered in the fields with the year's seeds. When I got my first period at 13, my mother wanted to have a party. Just small, all women, she said, I want to celebrate you. It was already too late. I seethed with something greater than the advent of my own fertility, the hormones catapulting through my body, the fact of our severed family, or the end of my child form. I'd been taught by my mother to honor these changes, but there were things for which she could not prepare me. The sum of it all was unspeakable. I would rather have died than celebrate this metamorphosis with her. It is so painful to be loved sometimes, intolerable even. Psychologists and philosophers have numerous explanations for the anger that attends this cleaving between parents and children. I've read about separation and differentiation and individuation. My mother is a therapist, after all. It is a most ordinary disruption, necessarily awful, sometimes severe, especially for mothers and daughters. The closer the mother and daughter are, the more violent the daughter's effort to disentangle herself can be. I'm not looking for permission or assurance that ours was a normal break, but rather a different kind of understanding. And for that, I need to retell our story. Cape Cod, April. I was 13 and had spent that Saturday at the library with Stacy. At least that was what I had told my mother when I got in her car that evening. The sun was half sunk behind a cluster of storefronts. The afternoon's warmth had turned cool, a breeze from the nearby harbor carrying the soft clang of a buoy's bell. I buckled my seatbelt and waved goodbye to Stacy, who turned to walk home. My mother and I watched her straight-backed gait, the edge of her t-shirt rippling in the wind. "You smell like sex," my mother said. Her tone was one of exhaustion. "Please," it said, "just tell me the truth. I know it already. Let's be in this together." It was easy to present the shock of my humiliation as incredulity. I'd done so before, and we both knew it. "I've never had sex," I said, and I believed this. My mother shifted into gear and turned toward the exit. "Sex isn't just intercourse," she said. We drove home in silence. I don't know if we had a conversation about trust that night. We'd had them so many times before. My mother trying to broker an understanding, to cast a line across the distance between us. If trust was broken, she explained, it had to be rebuilt. But the sanctity of our trust held no currency with me, so broken trust came to mean the loss of certain freedoms. She didn't want to revoke my privileges. She wanted me to come home to her. Probably I knew this. If she didn't like the distance my lies created, then she would like even less my silences and sulks, my slammed bedroom door. Of course I won these battles. We each had something the other wanted, but I alone had conviction. How many times could she call me a liar or believe me to be one? I was relentless in my refusal to acknowledge what we both knew. I went on drug deliveries with a friend's mother who sold them. I snuck boys into our home or met them behind the movie theater. Grown men had groped me in backyards and basements, on docks and in doorways, and there was nothing my mother could do to protect me. It must have felt like an abduction to her, as if someone had stolen her daughter and replaced her with a harpy. I chose to leave her, to lie, to rush to places where people might lay their hands on me, but I was still a child. Who then was my abductor? Can we call it Hades? The desire that filled me like smoke, that chased everything else out? I was frightened, yes, but I went willingly. Maybe that was the scariest part. When I told her just a few months short of 17 that I was moving out, she didn't try to stop me. I knew she didn't want me to go. "Maybe I should have tried to stop you," she said to me more than once, "but I was afraid that I would lose you for good." Zeus insisted Hades return Persephone to her mother, and the Dark Lord capitulated on one condition. If Persephone had tasted any food of the underworld, she would be consigned to return to Hades for half of every year. Did Persephone know? Yes and no. In some versions, she thinks she's smart enough to evade him, to taste and still go home. There are so many holes in myth, so many versions and mutations, most unstamped by chronology. A myth is the memory of a story passed through time. Like any memory, it changes, sometimes by will or necessity or forgetting, or even for aesthetic purpose. The pomegranate seeds were so lovely, like rubies, and so sweet. In every version of the story, Persephone tastes them. It was winter in Boston. I was 17. I didn't start with heroin. I started with meth, though we called it crystal, which sounded much prettier than the burnt clumps of tinfoil that littered our apartment and whose singed smell hung in the air as if an oven had been left on too long. Imagine Persephone's first season in hell. When I phoned home, I apologized to my mother for not calling. "I've been busy with classes," I said. "I'm making such nice friends." These were half-truths. I wasn't missing classes. I did make friends. I had a job and homework and a bed without a door, a bedroom without a door that cost me $150 per month in rent. My mother would have paid for more, but with it, she would have also bought more claim on the truth. When I rode the Greyhound bus home and ate the meals my mother made and slept in my old room, it was like rising from some underworld to the golden light of earth. I missed it so much. I couldn't wait to leave again. Imagine Persephone loving Hades. Is it so impossible? She could not have escaped him by dying, after all. We often love the things that abduct us. I imagine I would find a way if I were bound to someone for the rest of my life, for half of eternity. It was Christmas or Thanksgiving. My mother, brother, and I joined hands around the table, the steaming food encircled by our arms. We squeezed each other's fingers, pressed our thumbs into each other's palms. After the dishes were washed, my mother sank into the sofa and smiled at us. "Should we play a game?" she asked. "I need to borrow your car," I said. I can hardly bear to remember her disappointed face. I don't remember what I answered, only that she let me and how much it hurt to leave them. I pulled the front door shut behind me and something tore inside, like a chapped lip that rends at a word. Still, the quickening as I lit a cigarette in the dark and turned off our road toward the highway. I imagine this is the way a man feels, leaving his family for his mistress. I did feel part father, part husband, and maybe every daughter does, or just the ones whose fathers are gone. I didn't tell her when I got clean. She'd never known that I'd started. I knew what she knew what she saw, and that was bad enough. You can't crawl up to your mother from hell and not look like it. If I told her why she didn't have to worry anymore, I'd have to confirm why she'd worried. I'd have to be done for good. What if Persephone had told Demeter not only what happened in hell, but that she might be coming home for good? What daughter would do that? 3 years later, I sent her the book I'd written. "You can't call me until after you finished reading it," I said. In it were all the things I'd never told her or anyone. "Take as much time as you need," I said, hoping she'd take long enough to not need to talk to me about how it felt to know those things. She agreed, but the phone rang the next morning at 7 o'clock. "I couldn't stop reading it," she said. I kept putting it down and turning out the light and then turning it back on and then picking up the book again. And when I asked what she found so riveting about it, she said, "I had to know that you were going to be all right." "It was the hardest thing I've ever had to read," she said, "and it's wonderful." A few years ago, at a conference my mother attends every year, we stood in front of a room packed with therapists. She began the workshop by leading them through an explanation of the model she trains clinicians in around the world. She was warm and funny, expert and charismatic. You could easily see why our mailbox had always filled with heartfelt cards from patients she'd stopped seeing decades ago. When she was done, I stood and spoke about how writing allows me to retread the most painful parts of the past and find not only new meaning, but also healing there. That whole weekend, people clasped our hands and praised our work together. They marveled at the miracle of our collaboration. "How special," they said. "Whose idea was this?" "Hers," I told them. And I'll stop there. Thank you all so much for your attention. It's been an absolute privilege, and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. I don't know. I'll cede it to you, Phil.
We'll see if anybody wants to ask a question. I think RJ can allow you guys to unmute yourselves if anybody would like to. If you want to type something into the chat, I can also, if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, I can ask the questions if they come into chat, if I can find the chat, but I suppose I can do that.
I can see the chat too. And feel free if anybody wants to ask, anything about writing or anything I read about or whatever's on your mind. I like answering questions, so don't be shy.
I have a question. Your writing, did it start after all of these life experiences, like as a means of, I have to get this on paper, or was it something that you had done your entire life?
It was something I'd actually done my entire life, although I'm careful about saying that sometimes because it's not a prerequisite for being a writer. And I think that even if it hadn't been something that I'd been doing my whole life, I would have come to it after I lived, the first quarter of my life. Because for me, writing really is, it's the only place where I can process some things because I am so secretive. I think people have an idea that memoirists are sort of oversharers in general, or we're like comfortable sharing all of our dirty laundry with people. And actually, I think it's the opposite, where I'm like a very secretive, very private, like secretly shy person. And so basically everything I've ever written about is something that I couldn't talk about with anyone. And the only way for me to sort of have a conversation about it was to write about it. And as a result of that, it's totally changed my relationship to any of those experiences.
Interesting.
Are there any memoir writers that you particularly like?
Oh God, so many. I couldn't even begin. I know a mutual friend of Phil's and mine, Mary Carr, is one of the first memoirists I ever read, and I absolutely love her work. I would say another, a former teacher of mine, Joanne Beard. She is an upstate writer, and she was one of my favorite personal essayists, and then she became my teacher when I was in grad school. And she actually published a book this past year too called Festival Days. She's an amazing writer. And I think, it's funny, when I was a kid, I was a really obsessive, like almost addictive reader. And I didn't differentiate at all between memoir and novels. I just was like, just gobbled all of it. And so there are books that I now know are fiction or are memoir that I just sort of made arbitrary decisions about. Like I remember, I'll give you one example, is Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina, which is such a devastating, beautiful book if you haven't read it. But I remember reading it like as a teen, and I assumed it was a memoir. And it's really funny because then I found out it was a novel, but I read an interview with her like later as I was teaching, in which she said it's basically a memoir, but I just called it a novel so I wouldn't have to deal with my family. Which is like, a kind of wisdom I don't seem to be able to access for whatever reason.
I have a question. I really resonated with girlhood a lot. And I now teach sex ed. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that you really, really wish that sex ed would have taught that could have, like, I'm always kind of thinking like, oh, if sex ed would have just done X, Y, and Z, like maybe some of the trauma that I went through wouldn't have had to exist. So I'm wondering if you have any insight into what you think sex ed should include.
Oh my God. First of all, thank you for your service. There's no way that's ever an easy job. I do not envy you. But I am very grateful for the work that you're doing. And then where do I even start? All I remember about sex ed was the like condom and the banana exercise and like the terrifying birth video that we like, it was like scared straight, but it didn't, scare me straight in any interpretation of that phrase. I will say probably at the top of my list would just be consent, and like a nuanced conversation about consent, right? Because it was like, there were people, I don't think I learned it in school, but my parents definitely were like, your body's a temple. You should respect yourself. You should demand that other people respect you. But nobody explained how to do that, right? Like it's really hard when you live in a society where there are multiple forces conspiring to encourage you to say yes all the time. And then people are like, just say no. It's not that easy, right? And so I think like a much more sort of nuanced conversation about like some role playing, which would just be totally excruciating for the students, but probably really helpful, because it's much easier said than done, and I think also it's like when we have conversations about consent, we're often sort of talking to girls or women about like saying yes or no. And I think it's like a conversation. Like I remember them splitting us up by genders in sex ed. And I was like, not a good idea, the last thing I'll say about this, like I talk about it forever, is that I went to this amazing sort of hippie summer camp, and we did this exercise called Fishbowl, which is an exercise I've like done as part of like other kinds of workshops, but basically we did separate by gender, which might not be the best way to do it. But what we did was like all of the female identified people would sort of sit in the middle, and all of the male identified people would submit anonymous questions to the like counselor moderator. And so they would be questions like, what does an orgasm feel like? Like what, and then everyone in sort of the inside of the fishbowl would just talk amongst themselves. And so it was like getting to sort of watch a conversation rather than like directly asking a terrifying question. And also there was someone to sort of censor and like sort through the questions. And that made such a deep impression upon me because it felt like a way to facilitate a conversation that young people are just like not capable of having, So yeah, thank you. That's an amazing question. I'm not really qualified, but I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great.
Oh, it looks like we have a question in the chat from another Melissa. Hi, Melissa. Okay, I'm just going to read it. I've taught Whip Smart in several classes, and it's one of the memoirs that inspired me to start writing memoir essays in the summer of 2020 during the solitude of the pandemic. I have a collection of essays that I aspire to write about an era I spent working in some Seattle homeless shelters. I managed to finish 2 of the essays before the summer ended, but I haven't been able to get back into that deeply contemplative headspace ever since. So my question is, how do you find time to get into that memoir space during your day-to-day life amidst teaching, participating in a marriage, right? Participating in a marriage is no part-time job. This is a great question, and it's a perennial question for all of like anyone trying to make something that isn't a part of their everyday job, right? And I think for me, during the pandemic, I had the same thing. I moved to the Midwest after 20 years of living in New York. I started a new job. It felt like the whole country was on fire. And I just wasn't writing anything. And I thought, what would make this possible? Like, where could I possibly clear a space in my life where I can sort of get into that like stretchy, imaginative, curious place? Because it felt like everything about my day-to-day life was conspiring to like smother that part of me, like the news cycle, the emails, like I had some physical stuff going on. Anyway, what I came to was that the early morning was the time for me, which was a real challenge because I am by nature a night owl. I like to read and putter around and who knows, but I could stay up until 2 a.m. doing it easily. And I'm also a person who like really needs 8 or 9 hours of sleep. So luckily there was nothing going on in the evening times. So eventually I sort of trained myself to go to bed at like 8:45 and sleep before 10. And I started like creeping my wake up time back further and further and further until I was getting up at like 5:30 or 6 in the morning. And what I would do is leave my phone in the other room. I have software that blocks me from social media and the email. And the thing is, if you get up at 5:30 or 6 a.m., like nobody's emailing you at that time anyway. So there's the internal pressure to like start communicating is much lighter. And I found that period of time from like, 6 to 8:30 in the morning, it's quiet, no one's awake. Nobody was asking for anything from me. And it was just like, it was like traffic. Do you know what I mean? There was no congestion yet. And there was just like so much space in my mind. And that seemed to be a space where I could have a new idea or think about something other than a reaction to some other stimulus. And I say this not necessarily, that might not be the time for you, but if there is a time where you can be alone, like really sort of quiet inside, that is my recommendation. So that's what I figured out. And I'm actually still doing it. It's weird. Well, because now that things are happening a little bit like outside of our homes, people are like, oh, we're doing an outdoor reading and it starts at 7. And I was like, 7? You want me to be outside of my house at 8 p.m.? Like, it's the middle of the night. Like I'm in my pajamas by 8 p.m. So I don't know for how long I'll be able to keep that up, but it really was, I don't know. I don't even know who I am now. A morning person. It's really weird. But that's what I did. Oh, I will share one more thing. This is for all the married people who are trying to make art. My wife and I discovered that even though we were both sort of profoundly lonely and isolated in our house during the pandemic, we were also around each other like 24 hours a day. And about like 6 months in, we realized that like one of us has to go away for a weekend, like every other month, and just like stay in a roadside motel in town. So that the other person can have some alone time in the house and just like eat weird stuff at weird hours and talk really loudly on the phone and listen to our podcast without headphones. And it has been amazing. Strong recommend. Anybody else?
I've got a question.
Mhm.
So in the way that you write, it seems like a lot of the things that you come to or that the reader comes to through your essays are very profound bits of wisdom or, giant islands of wisdom. Would you set out writing an essay with that point, or were there times when you surprised yourself with the things that you came to during the writing process?
Yeah. It's almost always a surprise. I think if I already had access to insight, I would not be motivated enough to write an essay, which takes a long time and it's really hard and like discouraging at many points during the process. I think for me, writing, particularly in essay form, is my best way of thinking. Like, I know that reading my work, it seems like I'm a person who's like deeply thinking and feeling my feelings, and like that is not how I am in life. In life, I'm like wandering around, distracted, eating jelly beans, like totally dissociated. And I have mostly become a writer as a form of survival, because it's a place where I do deeply think about things and I stay focused and I can sort of get to the next thought, and where I'm willing to be really rigorously honest in a way that I can never be really in any other space. And so I'm almost always writing, like when you're reading my work, it really is in some ways like an archive of my thought process. And I almost always just arrive at the things at the end, like through the process of writing.
I have a quick question. Just, that's a great outline of of your process, and I'm just curious, like what is the kernel, or what does the starting point of that look like?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you have 50 ideas that that you're jotting down stuff on and one takes, or does the light bulb go off, or what does that,
Mm-hmm.
what does the initial thing and the jumping off point,
Yeah.
do you have a lot of starts and fails, or is it like it and I'm just curious for.
Yeah, there are definitely some starts and fails, and I definitely have a lot of ideas like written in the backs of notebooks and regular books and receipts and stuff like that. But I will say, I think it's funny because when I really sort of dig into something, I almost always finish it, and it almost always ends up like being something that I end up feeling interested in sharing with people. But here's what often happens. I think I'm going to do one thing. Like, I have this habit, and I can't believe that it still works. Like, every time I've published a book, I'm like, okay, that was kind of heavy and intense, like really dredging the lake here. I'm going to write something funny and whimsical and short. I'm going to write a short comedic essay, right? And then I sit down and I start typing, and I'm like, no, I'm at the bottom of the lake again. Like I can't tell you how many times it's happened. I really am like, oh, I'm just gonna write. Like, there's an essay in the book where I was like, oh, I'm just gonna write about how when I was a professional dominatrix, I like to spit on people. Like, that'll be fun. And then it's like I dredge up this old story of childhood bullying, and like I'm subject myself to this like emotional process again. And I think it's like I have an innate aversion to discomfort, to emotional discomfort, but the experience of confronting the scariest feelings and being really honest with myself has been so rewarding for me, that like there is an intelligence beneath my consciousness that is always gunning for that place, because it has made me such a better person than I would be otherwise, and has probably literally kept me alive. And so what's happening up here in my mind is like other stuff. I'm like, I'm gonna write a funny essay about putting my dog on antidepressants or whatever. And then like 60 pages later, I'm like, oh, right, I also went on antidepressants at the same time. So there is always a sort of impulse in the beginning, but I tell myself a story about it being something easier than it's going to be. Like I didn't know this book, Girlhood. I had no idea. I would not have been interested in writing that book if you had said to me, you're going to write this book and here are going to be the things in it. I would have barfed. Like that would have been so scary and unpleasant sounding. But instead I thought, oh, I'm just going to write a little whimsical essay about this or this or this. And then, 6 essays in, I was like, oh, damn, I've written another book, Dredging the Lake. So, yeah. Well, here we go in the chat. Okay. Have you ever had moments of pure adrenaline rush when writing? Yes. Also, have you ever had to use your fear of failure or some other feeling that you would have while writing, pushing you harder when writing? For instance, you have a due date in a few hours and you just start writing as much and as fast as humanly possible and realize that the work you just did is actually really well done. That is like in a capsule, the story of my college experience for sure. I'm really happy to say that I no longer really live that way. And I do get adrenaline rush or at least I have a kind of correlative experience where sometimes I start writing something and it's just, I don't know, the channel opens really wide and it feels easy and sort of urgent, and I can do it really fast. And that is a beautiful feeling. It's really exhilarating. It happens maybe like 10% of the time, maybe not even that much. And I think when I was younger, it was having a deadline or a due date was the only thing that would really push me into the process. Like, even though it was the thing I cared about the most and that I found the most rewarding, I would avoid it like the plague. And so whenever I had a deadline, I would be watching Enemy of the State on cable again. And then like the night before it was due, I would start typing and then be like, gee, this isn't bad. Like if I had started it a week ago, it might be really good. I will say that when I was in graduate school, I basically had a moment of reckoning with myself where I said, if you really want to make this your life, you're going to have to find a more sustainable way of doing it. And I made a decision to try actually writing like most days and not just doing it in a bingey kind of way. And so I don't really do that so much anymore unless I get really behind. But it is familiar to me. Also, this picture of this long-haired dachshund on your Zoom account is really cute. Thank you, Jacob.
I have a question. Coming from someone who normally tries to write fiction, I have a bad problem of getting a certain, length in or whatnot. And then I over edit for myself and I freak and I turn around and I say, this is horrible. And there goes that in a fire. But I'm wondering, in terms of personal experience in writing a memoir, does that still happen? Like same amount, less, more frequent?
Yeah, I mean, it does happen, but I will say, I sort of think of there being two kinds of writers. There are the people like you who I respect more, who tend to sort of hold on to things for a really long time, have real perfectionist streaks, and just want to work on it and work on it and work on it and work on it. And then the other category to which I belong are sort of people who are kind of like golden retrievers about it, where they write a first draft and they're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever written. And they want to show it to everyone and get pats on the head. And then 10 minutes later, they're like, oh no, I'm so embarrassed. I definitely shouldn't have shown that to anyone. And so I've had to sort of conscientiously work to become less like this and more like you. But I think the key for all of us is really to figure out where our, I don't want to use the word weaknesses, but to sort of trust that we have the instincts we do and try to cultivate the ones that we don't already have, you know? And so for me, that has meant holding on to things when I want encouragement, learning how to ask for encouragement when I want it and not confuse that for wanting feedback on my work before it's ready. And I think for folks who hold on to things too long, like you, it means sort of being brave and letting people see stuff before it feels totally safe, because it never feels totally safe, you know? But I know a lot of people who definitely sort of hold on to things for a long time, but it's taken me a long time to train myself to do that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like if I don't throw it out, which I'm trying to get into the habit of not doing, because you never know.
Don't throw anything out. No,
Exactly.
just save it somewhere.
I come across something on a computer that I do happen to save, and I'm like, why did I not like this back then? What was wrong with it back then?
It's really the other thing I'll say about that is that, you know, we are such unreliable judges when we're writing. It's just like we're in a weird state of hypnosis. And I can look back at all of my books and find the places, the chapters, the essays where it felt gross, where I just, the whole time I was writing, I was like, oh, this is terrible. It's so bad. Everyone's going to hate it. They're going to hate me. I hate me. Oh, and I just kept writing. And I tell you, it was just like, I didn't get enough sleep, or I don't know what, you know, because now when I look back, it was just like all the rest of it, where it was like pretty good and it got much better through revision, but it's indistinguishable from the other parts that felt like the channel was like totally open and I felt like the muses were speaking through me, you know, like you really can't tell until later. So you don't throw anything away ever. So Logan is asking, what was the tipping point that made you decide to go from writing just for you to writing professionally? I don't know. I was a really sort of like, when I was a kid, I started fantasizing really young about being a writer, mostly because I was really weird and I had read sort of things about writers and I was like, okay, so writers can be sort of antisocial and maybe drug addicts and like not like other people and still have a place in society. And I was like, okay, so maybe that's like a vocation where I might be able to fit into society. So I had pretty much decided on wanting to be a professional writer by the time I was like, I don't know, 10 or 11, something ridiculous like that. And I mean, the arrogance of it is really sort of like hilarious to me now. Like an 11-year-old walking around being like, I'm going to be a writer. But yeah, in some ways, I'm really grateful for it because I never really wondered what I was going to do. It was always just like, how do I do this thing that is, you know, extravagantly hard, but I just always knew.
I have another one. How old were you when you were first published, and are you self-published or were you published through a publishing company?
Yeah, I've never self-published, maybe except when I made a zine when I was like 15. But I published, let's see, I published my first, I think it was an essay when I was in grad school. So I was probably like 26, something like that. And I published my first book when I was 29, which is young, actually, you know. I think when we're younger, I know when I was younger, I was like, and by 25, I'll publish my first book. And then by this, and you know, I had no idea what it took to actually write a book and then to publish it. So it's a very long, slow process, but I'm really glad because you can be like middle-aged and still be thought of as like precocious as a writer. So that's a benefit. Thank you all for your amazing questions. I'm happy to answer one more if anyone has them. But this has been such a fun conversation. I really appreciate everyone hanging out for this long.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's been wonderful to have you with us tonight. I wish you were up here with us in person.
I know, me too.
I wish we
Hopefully
could go out to
sometime.
Sergi's for pizza.
I know. Me too. Me
Last
too.
time we had reservations at a fancy restaurant, but your Q&A went so long that restaurant closed, so we had to go. So all the local folks know why we ended up at Sergi's. Not that Sergi's isn't great.
It was really fun. It's a really, really good memory of mine. So thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, and we'll have you again for the next book. I like this tradition, so we'll keep it alive.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.